All right. Well, as we know, we are going to be in Revelation chapter 17 tonight. So let's go ahead and flip there as we continue in our study here in Revelation. We're behind, but I'm still hopeful that as we trudge through, push through, get through some of these chapters, we can do some catching up in Revelation 18 and 19, because I've split those up into several sections, and I think if we move rather quickly tonight, we may do Cliff Notes version, that we can make it through and have Revelation done by the end of the year, because we have been in Revelation for over a year now, and so as we continue to push forward, we're hoping to move forward. So as we do tonight, we're gonna, as we always do with our study of in Revelation, let us begin by reading the passage and trying to figure out some questions based on the passage that we can kind of hit tonight. We didn't really do this last week as much because I kind of had my own agenda, but tonight I want us to set the agenda once again as we ask questions. I will, as way of just kind of introduction, we need to do a little review. Where have we been? What has just happened at the end of chapter 16, and what's the transition that's happening here? So we had Armageddon. We had the last of the 7 bowls of God's wrath that was poured out. What I interpret as the end of the world, and I think we're going to see here in chapter 17 through 19 really zooming in on that. It's kind of how we've been doing these kind of callbacks to what has been going on. I think 17 to 19 is kind of a zooming in of the Battle of Armageddon and the toppling of the great city that we see here in verse 19 of chapter 16. Babylon, we're going to talk a lot about Babylon in these, and the fall of Babylon, the world systems as we have come to interpret them. So that's where we are. Revelation chapter 16 ends a vision of the wrath, and so then we're going to have another vision, another set of visions that's going to be introduced here in the beginning of chapter 17, and really these 17 to 19, where Christ comes again and conquers perfectly, will encapsulate, I think, kind of a zooming in of what is happening in the 6th and 7th bowls. All right, with that in our minds, let us read Revelation chapter 17. We'll read the entire chapter, and then as we finish, we're going through there, let's come up with some questions that we can think of, and then we will move through those questions and try to answer as many as we can tonight through study. So, Revelation chapter 17, we'll begin there in verse 1. It says this, Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on the many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind of wisdom. With the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. 1 is, and 1 has yet to come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the great woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. My goodness, there's a lot in here as we do see, and this is the part of Revelation that gets very tricky, gets very open to interpretation, gets very can be very tricky, and it's the part that I have been dreading to teach, because up to this point we have a lot of, I think, are clear-cut Old Testament references. But a lot of these things here, I have my views on them, of course, but again, as all of my views with Revelation, I hold them with a very open hand. It's open to much interpretation. And so, as we come to this, we're going to see that this is the first time, I believe, where we cannot possibly take a literal approach to this passage. We haven't been doing that. But that interpretive, even if we can somehow get to this point of Revelation, doing a literal approach, talking about how these things are literal things, there is absolutely no way we can interpret this passage literally. Because I don't think there's an actual prostitute seated out on some waters who the kings of the earth just go out to all the time. This is not true. This is not that's what's going to happen in the future or something. No, there is something else going on here, and it's going to be very spiritual in nature. And so as we come to this passage, what are some of our questions, some of our thoughts, our comments, okay, so who is the prostitute? I will tell you the mystery of the woman. Oh, wait, I didn't go far enough back. I'm like, this doesn't seem right. All right, so I want to make sure that we're getting everything. All right, so yes, absolutely. I think one of our first questions does need to be, who is the prostitute? I think there's a question here that I've kind of hinted towards that you can see there's a connection here because of who takes John to see this vision. Who is it? Which angel? Not just any angel. One of the 7 angels who had the great bowls of wrath. And so there is some connection, right, between what is going on in these visions and what has gone on in the visions before, right? I mean, there has to be. There has to be a connection because of that opening phrase. And so I'm going to say, what is the connection? Ooh, that's not that should be an N. All right, continue. What is the connection? That's not, is that between? Is that shorthand for between? BW? Is it? I think it is. Between the bowls. By the time I asked all that, I could have just written the word between. The bowls and these visions. All right, what else? All right, so who's the prostitute? What else? Okay, who's the scarlet beast? We're jumping down a little bit to verse 3, correct? All right, verse 3. Who is the scarlet beast? Okay, maybe what are the... I'll put that with waters, with the prostitute. What about the waters? Who is the prostitute / what are the waters? All right, kings of the earth, I think we can kind of understand that, but there's an idea that we maybe want to talk about that a little bit, but I think there's an important phrase here in verse 3 that we should address here. Why, and that's the setting. Why is the vision in the wilderness? Right? At least that's a question I have. All right, so who's the scarlet beast? All right, let's keep rolling. I think we don't really need to talk much about the prostitute because we're seeing this woman being kind of, these are going to be the interpretive tools that are going to help us to understand who this woman is. On her forehead, verse 5, right? So I think all of these are descriptions of the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs. Okay, so let's move on to verse 7. All right. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. All right. Any questions in the end of verse 6, 7 on down? I have a question. Verse 6/7. Why did John marvel? Again, if I approach Scripture as nothing's in there on accident, right? There's nothing in here on accident. John has Saul. I am becoming, never mind, I'm not going to say that. John has seen some crazy things, right? He has seen some crazy things to this point. We've seen them with him. We've seen his description of them. He never said at any point, and I marveled. And I thought that was crazy, or any of that stuff. When have we seen another reaction of John in Revelation, where he actually reacted with? There've been maybe two places. Anybody remember? Where John actually describes how he reacted to what he was seeing, or reacted to what he saw. Most of the time, he's just reporting what he saw in these visions, right? You can look back if you want and go cheat. You may want to go back kind of far. So when he was in heaven, what did he do? No one was worthy to open the scroll. So what did he do? He wept. He responded to the vision that he saw by weeping. And I think it's very important that John included that. He included that reaction, and it was important for not even just our interpretation of that reaction, but of that passage. But it put us into the passage to understand how we should react to the fact that there is no one worthy to open the scroll. That should be our reaction, right? And so then I think we're seeing again, right? And we need to look at why he marveled. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but why did John marvel? He reacted. And maybe that should be our reaction. But the angel actually kind of rebukes him for it. So that's why I say verse 6 or 7. All right, so then let's keep moving. Verse 8, anything there? What about this threefold? I'm going to call it a threefold phrase. It's repeated several times. The one who was, who is not, and who is to come. That's actually repeated twice here. Again, there in verse 10. It's actually repeated. We'll see as we go along. It's actually repeated even more times than just we see. It's actually repeated even in the way some of these things are worded. All right, so I think that threefold phrase of verse 8, dwellers of the earth, I think we kind of understand. We're gonna talk about this a little bit. All right, this calls for a mind with wisdom. Verse 9. Verse 9 and verse 10 are my least favorite verses in all of the book of Revelation. maybe, because they are hard. Because literally he sets us up for it. This calls for a mind of wisdom. You need to discern what's happening here. This is not John now speaking. Who's speaking here? The angel is speaking to John. He's saying, listen, be wise about this. Be discerning about what I'm about to tell you. All right, so what about these 7 heads? I think we need to talk about the 7 heads and the 10 horns. And what is the meaning of all of this? This is really verses 9 and 10. All right, then verse 11. What about this 8th thing? Okay, as for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th. What does that mean? So I'm just going to put it is an 8th with a question mark. All right, what does that mean? All right, 12, I think, kind of gives us a little more interpretation of the 10 horns and the 10 kings. So we'll actually, or 7, so the 7 heads are actually here. And we'll put 9 to 10, and we will do 12 to just 12. Oh, no, 13 includes them there too. Really, 14. All right, moving on, verse 15. Okay, I think we have some interpretive things here that we're going to need to look at. Any questions from 15? We're going to get a little bit of an answer to what the waters are. Maybe 16. The 10 horns you saw, they and the beast. Why, I think, why do the 10 horns and beast hate the prostitute? That's a good question. I should not be writing on a board. I have terrible handwriting. Verse 16 to 17 probably. Until the words. All right, the woman that you saw. So we already saw that there was, and so I think verse 18, what is this great city? All right, does that feel good to everyone? Any other questions that are coming to your mind as we read through? I think we're going to cover most everything that is in this passage. All right, so let's begin with the connection between the bowls and these visions. Let me ask you, what do you think is the connection between the vision that we just read about that also has an interpretation of sorts, very cryptic interpretation, right? What do you think is the connection between these visions that we just saw and the visions and the bowls that we just saw? Okay, the fulfillment. Okay, maybe. Okay, it's kind of the fulfillment, kind of the how, maybe, of how it's carried out, how it's fulfilled. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Yeah, I think there's something there. I mean, let's go back and read again at least the 6th bowl and the 7th bowl. It says, the 6th angel poured out his bowl on the river Euphrates, and its water dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east. Well, we have in our vision, we have kings, and we have kings from the east coming here. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, spirits, ugly spirits like frogs. They demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the kings of the whole world. Now we have kings of the whole world in this passage several times in our new vision, to assemble them for the battle on the great day of the God the Almighty And then he gives us, behold, that he is coming like a thief. And they assembled them at the place in the Hebrew that's called Armageddon. Now, notice, right? We mentioned this last week, but notice, at the end of verse 16, they're just assembled. Nothing's happening. Nothing happens. And so it's almost like if we're reading this, as if I'm reading it as somebody who likes literature, well, what happened at Armageddon? They all gathered there. Well, I mean, what? So I think the fulfillment is a good word. What actually took place once they all got to Armageddon, I think that's part of how they're connected. But then if we keep reading the seventh bowl, the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air. A loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." There were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder. A great earthquake, such as has never been since the earth, and so great was that earthquake. And 19, the great city was split into 3 parts, and the city of the nations fell, and God remembered Babylon the Great. Now we have Babylon being mentioned in this, Babylon the Great being mentioned in our new vision. We have the city, the great city, being mentioned in the new vision. And so I think we have definitely some connections between what is going on in the 6th and 7th bowl, particularly, and what is happening now in this vision, and what's going to happen in chapter 17, 18, and 19. All right, so again, here is where my interpretation of Revelation is going to come out very strongly. This is not a linear progression of events. It's not the seals have to happen so the trumpets can happen so the bowls can happen. It is the order in which John saw visions, and the visions are recapitulating, retelling, re-showing the same events from different angles. And we see that, I believe, the most clearly right here. Because I don't think there's any question that what's happening in the 6th and 7th bowl in some way is being talked about in chapter 17, 18, and 19. I mean, I don't think we can get around that. Even dispensational scholars, even people who take a very literal approach, are going to say that in some way, what 17, 18, and 19 are kind of a parenthetical thought expounding what happened in 6 and 7. All right? And so here's where I believe that's what's been taking place this whole time, right? In the whole of the Bible. Now, what we're going to be talking about, I believe, from here on out, are things that apply to now, but also apply to a future time, a future final thing where all of this will happen, will take place. All right, so there we go. That's what I think is the connection between the bowls and these visions. The fulfillment is a good word, Miss Edith. I'm going to use the word zooming in. It's almost like he gives the big picture in chapter 16, and he's like, all right, now let's back up, and let me tell you the details. This is a very common practice in the Bible. If you read the Old Testament, you'll just start reading in Genesis chapter 1. There are lots of these things where, for instance, he gives an overview. Genesis chapter 1 is an overview of the days of creation. Then what does he do? He zooms in chapter 2 to the sixth day when man was created and how woman was created from man, right? It's a overview and then a zooming in. It happens over and over again in the scriptures, and it's happening here even, I think. All right, so moving on. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters." And this prostitute, it says in verse 2, is one with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. All right, so let me just ask you, who do you believe is this prostitute? Okay, it's Babylon. So what is Babylon? It's all right. It's the great city. All right, and so what is the great city? It is a harlot, yeah, sure, which is the same thing as a prostitute. Harlot, prostitute, lady of the night, they're all the same thing. So it is a corrupt world government that is in some way, right, is in some way in bed, so to speak, right, with the beast, leading people to the beast. But it's almost like the enticing things of this world, the great city. I mean, what is the great city? We talked about the idea of it being Babylon, but we talked about the great city not just being a literal city, but being any government, any seat of power that is pointing people actively away from Christ, right? And that's what we've been talking about this is. All right, so we're right on. Is it Rome? Did John think it was Rome in his day? Probably. Probably he was thinking the city is Rome. In our day, what is the city? It's not Rome. It could be. People could say, well, it is the Vatican or something like that, but I don't. And many dispensational scholars are going to say that. No, who's the city in our day? It's all the cities. New York, D.C., Paris, London, all of the cities of the world that are enticing men and women away from the things of God. And it's almost like the because it's a beautiful description of this prostitute. I mean, she is a prostitute, a lady of the night. But let's not be super crass here, but prostitutes, how do they make a living? They have to lure people in. They have to sell them on themselves, right? And then say, look at what I've got, and what I've got is what you need. Does that sound like anything in our world today? Well, does that sound like anything in our world today? I mean, it's literally every commercial you've ever seen. It's every city. I've got what you need. Your life will not be complete. Your life will not be fulfilled. Your life will not be right without what I have. I mean, prostitution is an economic endeavor, right? It's a selling of a service, right, for pleasure, but it is an exchange. And so, who is this great prostitute? Well, it is the great city, right? It is those who would lure the governments who would lure us away, right? It happens in every part of our society, right? It happens in our economic society, in our economics. It happens in our government. I have the answer that no one else has, and I can give you the thing that you need, right? That's the promise of every politician that's ever lived, it feels like. And this is the great prostitute. And what happens with this, right? It is the world systems, and the world systems, they are enticing. They do look great. Look at how he talks about them. Well, he says that she sits on these waters, and we'll talk about what that is. I think what we're talking about here, right, is the great city. And what does it say the waters are if we were to move down to the end of the passage there in verse 15? The waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. Where do these cities happen? In nations, multitudes, peoples, and languages, right? That's where we have cities. That's where we have governments that entice people away. That's where we have systems that entice people away from God, right? And from the things of God. And they are attractive, and they look good, and they promise life. They promise the things that can only be found in Jesus. That's the idea. A substitute for the things of God, trying to do that. And look, the kings of the earth have fallen for it. They've all committed sexual immorality, verse 2. And with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers of the earth have become drunk. Now, if our interpretation of this, right, it cannot be a literal thing, right? Is there a little prostitute somewhere on some waters, out on an island somewhere, where all of the people of the world are enticed by her? No. I mean, we would have seen it all over TV by now, right? Okay, Andrew, it's future. It's all future. It's all future. Come on. just be real with ourselves for a second. Nothing in Revelation has pointed to that we're looking at very literal things here. What we see and how we're interpreting this is it tells us that the prostitute inn is the great city, right? Where does it say this? Sorry. I'm losing my place here. Verse 18, the very last verse of the passage. The woman is the great city. The woman that you saw is the great city, right? It is Babylon. And that's how we know that, right, what we're interpreting is we're taking what John has already talked about, great city, Babylon, the beastly, worldly economic systems, and we're just interpreting this passage the same way that we've been interpreting every other passage. There's congruency here, and so what this is, right, is it is the enticement of the world, right, to as he's used this metaphor. We've used this metaphor before. He talks about the idea of cheating on or committing sexual immorality with this world as a way of talking about how Christians can be led away, right? How we are to be faithful to Christ and how we can not serve both. And as we go back to the letters to the churches, as we go back to those people who were being suppressed and oppressed in those economic systems, were being enticed to take this, it was on the physical mark, but to take on all the accoutrements, all the things that go along with being a part of the world system, right? They have this enticement to go and be led astray by like all of the kings of the earth. And so he says, look, I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to tell you the judgment of this great city. I'm going to tell you the judgment, the ultimate judgment of this great city that has enticed kings and queens and people for millennia. And so what does he do? Verse 3. All right, so who is the prostitute? Great city. We're just going to say the great city for time's sake. What are the waters? Nations, peoples, languages. All right, verse 3. He takes him away. He carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. Why a wilderness? Any thoughts on this? Okay, so what Edie's doing right now is exactly what I want us to do, right? Maybe it was no distractions, maybe get out of the city, but what I want us to do is think biblically for a second. What does the wilderness, what is typically the wilderness it's dry, barren. What does it stand in for? What is it, have we seen any wildernesses, if that's a word, in the book of Revelation? Wildernigh, yeah. I actually literally was thinking that very thing, wildernigh. No, it is wildernesses. I'm just messing. Wildernigh. But have we seen any, but let's think biblically for a second. What does the wilderness typically stand for? A dry, barren place. All right, think back. What has been in the top of our mind in the Old Testament over the past, all of the bowl judgments? What's been on our mind? Of the Old Testament, from the Old Testament. The Exodus plagues, okay? What happens after the plagues? They go into the wilderness. And then they actually, if you read Exodus, they go straight to the land. But then what happens? They turn him around, and so what is the wilderness in that Exodus story? It is a place of judgment, a place of the people weaning the unfaithful. It's a place of testing, right? That's what the wilderness is in all of the Old Testament. In the Old Testament as well, we also see cities being told that they will be made desolate like a wilderness. And so I don't have any of these passages readily available on the screen, but I can give you those later. But this happens quite often in the judgment, and when judgment is meted out or judgment is proclaimed on great cities. I'll make you a wilderness. I'll make you desolate, right? Like a wilderness. But my question still remains, have we seen any wilderness in Revelation? Remember, the wilderness, a place of judgment, a place of testing, a place of weaning out. Have we seen any wildernesses already in any visions in Revelation? You don't have to go back that far. The answer is yes. Now find it. That's my next thing. I'm looking at it. Think back to chapter 12. So the wilderness, a place of judgment. The wilderness, a place of testing. But the wilderness is also a place of nourishment, a place of refreshing, a place to get away from the city, right? As we've said. Look at the end of verse 6. The woman, who's the woman? Who's the woman here? This is a different woman. God's faithful people. This is not the woman who is clothed in, not the prostitute. This is a different woman. This is the woman who is clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, it says in chapter 12, verse 1. The woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. All right, so now, okay, so let's just stop for a second. We've seen this vision. The visions are separate visions, yes, but they bleed into one another. The last time we saw a wilderness, there was a woman who was in the wilderness, right? And she was there and she was being nourished. The God's faithful people being nourished. Now, why are we going to the wilderness? Because this is where, yes, refreshment is happening for the people, but this is where God's judgment will be meted out. It's where ultimately the wilderness is the setting for the battle that we call Armageddon. It's the setting for the destruction of the kings of the world. It's the destruction of this great city. It's the setting for all of those things. And so he's carried out there because, number one, that's where the woman is, right? God's faithful people are out there. As we've seen before. What does this mean in our terms? I don't really know. I don't really think there's a one-to-one thing. I think this is very spiritual in nature, right? That he's carried out to the wilderness to see this woman trying to come, I believe, to come and entice the people of God to ally themselves with the things of this world. What's the whole message of Revelation that we've seen to this point? You've got a choice between two cities, two marks, two books, it's literally always a choice between two things. You can either go with the world, the beast, the Antichrist, all of these things over here, or you can go with Jesus, the Lamb, the city of God, the people of God, right? And so that's the question. Who are you going to choose? And so what is he saying here? Look, even in the wilderness, the beast is going to come out, and he is going to entice you with the world systems. What are you going to do? Right? That's the point here. That's the point that he's trying to make for us. We live in the world system, and we are daily enticed by the world, enticed to buy the next best thing, to play into the economic rush of making more, being more, doing more, right? No, I'm just talking about right now. our world right now, the way it is, do I believe in a future one world religion? All religions are the same except for one true religion. We talked about this earlier in our study, right? All religions that are not teaching that Jesus is God's Son, is God, who died in our place, the Christian beliefs, right, is Antichrist. Right? That's what we've said. That's the false religions of this world. So we don't need one world religion. We've already got that in many ways. All the religions have at their base Satan. I mean, he's behind every single world religion, right? The ultimate Antichrist. And so we don't have to think in terms of, are we thinking of some one religion? It's here. It's a reality. And I think that's where I continue to say, like, we can teach Revelation in so many ways, but Revelation's meant to mean something right here, right now. And the message of Revelation and what this vision here is, look, even in the wilderness, as you're being refreshed, even in the wilderness where you're in this place prepared, you're going to have the enticements of the world. Because listen, some of us might want to say, well, I'm not enticed by the world. I don't live by the world. I mean, the world is very attractive. And it is dressed up like a woman of the night. I mean, that's basically what he's saying. It's dressed up like a woman of the night, dolls itself up, promises you the world, and then what happens? Leaves you broke and feeling empty and disgusting, right? I mean, that's what the world does. It eats us up and spits us out. And so he's saying, are you going to get in bed with the world? Because that's how it's going to leave you. It's going to leave you feeling empty. It's going to leave you feeling all those things, right? And so what is he saying? He was carried away into the wilderness, and he saw there, verse 3, a woman sitting, this woman, right? It's the same woman, sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names. And it had 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, this wilderness thing here relates to, so I've missed a couple of passages that I was going to hit. So this whole prostitute thing, it's not a new thing that just John pulled out of the sky and out of nowhere. The prostitute thing is a theme throughout the whole of the Old Testament, right? We see it over and over and over again. Hosea chapter 4 specifically talks about the idea of being led astray into whoredom, same thing, prostitution, whoredom, wine, new wine, which take away the understanding. My people inquire of a piece of wood, and their walking staff gives them oracles, for a spirit of whoredom has led them astray, and they have left their God to play the whore. Right? This is not a new thing, this prostitute, the great prostitute here. In fact, it's not a new thing even in the book of Revelation. We've had someone who is described in the Old Testament very much the same way as this prostitute is described here and is going to be described elsewhere. And who is that? Jezebel. Revelation chapter 2, verse 20. Look at it with me. We're going back to the letters here. Chapter 2, verse 20. But I have this against you, that you tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess and is teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. What was Jezebel in chapter 2, verse 20 doing? Enticing, doing the same thing that we see this whore, this prostitute doing. Now, there is a lot of similarities, and I could go through the similarities. Jezebel is described. We already went through them a little bit when we went through chapter 2, verse 20. Go back and look. I actually looked over that earlier. I actually talked a lot about and went to chapter 17 and talked about how the description of Jezebel in the Old Testament very much matches the description of what John is saying here. Jezebel was an Old Testament figure who was a government official, right? A queen who was enticing the people of God to get into bed with idols, get into bed with the world system, get into bed with the false religions of the world, right? Don't worship God. Don't worship money. Worship sex. Worship harvests, right? That was who Baal was, the god of the harvest, right? So this same woman, right, who's now coming in, who has all these blasphemous names, it's not a new thing, right? And I think, and I believe that a lot of what John is pulling here is he's pulling from the Old Testament, and specifically the Old Testament vision seen in Isaiah chapter 21. Isaiah chapter 21, verses 1 to 10, is an oracle against who? Do you know? It's at the end, Babylon. And in this, he says, look, this is the oracle concerning the wilderness of the sea. As the whirlwinds in the Negeb sweep on, it comes from the wilderness, from a terrible land. A stern vision is told to me, the traitor betrays, and the destroyer destroys. Go up, Elam, lay siege, O Media. All the sighing she has caused, I bring to an end. Therefore my loins are filled with anguish. Pangs have seized me, like the pangs of a woman in labor. I am bowed down so that I cannot hear. I am dismayed so that I cannot see. My heart staggers. Horror has appalled me. The twilight I longed for has been turned for me into... I'm missing some stuff here. Into trembling, yes. They prepare the table. They spread the rugs. They eat. They drink. Arise, O princes. Oil the shield. For thus the Lord said to me, go set a watchman. Let him announce what he sees. When he sees riders, horsemen in pairs, riders on donkeys, riders on camels, let him listen diligently, very diligently. Then he who saw cried out, upon a watchtower I stand, O Lord, continually by day, and on my post I am stationed whole nights. And behold, here come riders, horsemen in pairs. And he answered, fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the carved images of her gods he has shattered to the ground. O my threshed and winnowed one, what I have heard from the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I announce to you. There's a lot of similarities here between what we're seeing in Revelation and specifically this idea of the wilderness. I don't think there's a mistake here that there's a connection between him going into the wilderness and this vision being in the wilderness. He talks a lot about, he uses the feminine pronoun a lot here. When he hears of things like her, let's see if I can find some of these. Yeah, she has exactly the sign she, and then if we move on, he sees, when he talks specifically about Babylon in verse 9, fallen, fallen is Babylon, and all the carved images of her gods, right? There's this idea here that he's equating Babylon with a woman in some way, which we see happening again in John's revelation, in the revelation of John. All right, so I think there's some connection here between Revelation chapter 21, or Revelation chapter 17, and Isaiah chapter 21. All right, so let's keep going here in Revelation. He said, he carried me away into the wilderness. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, and that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 7 horns, 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, and holding in her hand a cup, golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written the name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. This worldly system, right, is what cause is, in many cases, for Christians to be persecuted, to be martyred, right? The Roman, if we think specifically of the Roman time, in the time in which John is writing, the economic systems of the world dictated that you bow the knee to Caesar. That was part of what you were to do. Christians said there was only one Lord that I bow the knee to, and that is Jesus. And so many of them were martyred or killed under many different, because of this economic system, because of this religious system. And it has happened over and over again, right? Christians being martyred in the name of, and because they don't conform to the economic system of the world. And so the Babylon the Great, this economic system, the great city, right, who's riding through in this, beautifully arrayed, looking really dazzling. It's great, but she's got this cup in her hand with abominations and impurities, and on her forehead. Why on the forehead? Any thoughts here? Well, forehead has, in Revelation, right? And where else have we seen a mark on a forehead in Revelation? Mark of the beast. We've also seen Passover. We actually related it back to the Passover, but there was another mark. There's a choice between two marks that you can take, right? The saints received marks, right? And so in Revelation, marks on the forehead show your relation to Satan or to the Antichrist or to the Lamb, right? To the dragon or the Lamb. And so we see where her loyalty lies. She lies with Babylon the Great. It lies with the dragon, with trying to bring down the earth, right? Abominate the earth, right? So what is this, right? I think if we understand this as economic systems, as we've been saying, those cities, right, that stand in for the enticement of the world, I think it's very clear that fits in very well here, right? Many believers have been martyred, and specifically were being martyred in John's time because of their stand against the Babylon, right, so to speak. But here's the thing that really astonishes me in this passage. None of that really, all of that I think I can get with, right? If we want to say this is all future, this is all some future thing that's not actually happening now, then there's some end times Babylon, I don't know. I can't even get there. I can't even make myself get there anymore, because I just see so clearly that what he's warning us against is not to be in bed with the world. That's what he's warning us against, right? It's just so clear. But I think what's really quite unsettling here for me is the very next phrase in verse 6. Because up to this point, I think we've seen, I think we understand, and if we understand it this way, that next phrase is very unsettling. Look at it. When I saw her, who's speaking? John. Who is John? Remind me for a second. Not John the Baptist. The disciple, the Apostle John, who I believe wrote this, right? The Apostle John, who wrote 1 John, what we read earlier, and in the Gospel of John, the beloved disciple, the one the only disciple who stood at the feet of the cross, the one who was faithful to Christ through all these things. Here, he marvels. Now, this word marvel is something that should take us aback for a second, because it almost has the connotation of marveling so as to adore. He marveled at her. He marveled at this prostitute. Apostle, when we think of apostle, we think of super Christian, right? That's what we think. They walked with Jesus. They are super Christians. How could he look at this prostitute and marvel and look? When I think of that, it makes me want to crawl under a rock. Because if he marveled, how can we keep from marveling at the world system? How can we keep from marveling at the enticements of this world? But we can. And here's how. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? You see, the angel here, right, is God's representative. And so how do we keep from marveling? It's not going to be of our own power. Because I already know how I felt when I started hearing the message a little bit. All right, I gotta fight off that temptation. Just don't go down the alley where the prostitutes, where the lady of the night is. Well, it will constantly call us back. And if we just use willpower to overcome the temptation to be in bed with the world, we will never, ever overcome. How do we overcome? We talked about it in 1 John, but we overcome because God intervenes. He intervenes by building in us faith and giving us eyes open to see his glory, his majesty. And we overcome then by the faith that is a gift from God. And this faith here, we see John, in a way, receiving it. Why do you marvel? I'm going to tell you about the mystery of the woman, right? Don't worship this. Don't adore this. I'm going to tell you what this is really all about. I'm going to tell you what this is really all about. And I'll tell you about the beast of the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. Right? Don't marvel. Because who is the one that marvels? Look down in verse 8. Who are the ones that actually marvel? The dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast. This is why this is so unsettling to me. Because the same word that he used to describe the way he responded to the beast is the same word that he uses to describe the way unbelievers. And there's no way that you can question that he's talking about unbelievers. Those who have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, they will marvel to see the beast. What is he saying about himself here? He's human. An apostle, one who sat at the feet of Jesus, one who walked with Jesus, marveled at this thing. Can I just stop for a second and encourage us? I think sometimes we think we can do it. We can overcome those demons. We can overcome those lures, those things in our own soul, the pride in our own soul. That itself is pride. We cannot do it. We cannot. John couldn't do it. And I don't sense, I mean, he's humbled many other times here, but I sense in this moment he is humbling himself by saying, look, I marveled. Can I just tell you for a second? I marveled. And that's a lot of our testimonies. We marvel at the world system, and we buy into it. Money's going to give me pleasure. Having lots of success is going to give me pleasure. Having lots of fame is going to give me pleasure. And it's not. And we marvel at that and get into bed with that so often. Oh, that we would understand that the only way that we can overcome is through the faith that is a gift of God. We need God's help. We need him, as the great hymn says, we need thee every hour. Every hour. May we never lose sight of that. In everything that we do, in every way, we never will arrive this side of glory. Oh, that we would understand this. John did not arrive ever. He marveled. We marvel. All right, so we move on. Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery. What is this mystery? The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit. All right? We've skipped a few, but we moved down. Who's the scarlet beast? Let's think. Who is this? I think it's the Antichrist. We can call it Satan. The beast is Satan. The great Antichrist is Satan. It's not some human in the future. It is Satan. The great Antichrist is Satan. We've been talking about that all along. All right, why did John marvel? We just talked about that for a while. Well, he marveled because of the temptation. And I believe I'm going to just put, it's a warning to us. All right, now this threefold phrase that is mentioned here in verse 8. The beast that you saw was, is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit to go to destruction. Who is the beast, right? Who did we say it was? Or Satan? Satan is a counterfeit god. What is this threefold phrase? Is the same phrase, but it's not. It's a similar phrase to the phrase that we've been seeing to describe God, who was, who is, and who is to come. This beast was, is not. What does that mean? What do you think the phrase "is not" means? Not now. Okay, maybe. Not in the present. When you are, you exist. You're alive. When you are not, you're dead. Here we see that the beast is the one who was, but is not. Why is he is not, quote unquote? Why is he dead? What? He was cast out? He's in the abyss? Is this all future? Well, listen, this is where Revelation can get tricky, right? He is not. What defeated Satan? Christ's death, resurrection, his death on the cross, his resurrection, his ascension. That defeated Satan. It is what was the nail in the coffin for Satan, right? Yet he still prowls around like a roaring lion, trying to seek out people to devour. But the idea here is he actually doesn't hold ultimate authority. He is not. He's already dead in the water. It's just a matter of time. Because look, he is not, and he is only going to come. He's only going to come from the bottomless pit to go to destruction. Now, is this some future event that's happened? No. I think this is just simply talking about who Satan is. He is not. He's already bound. He is the one who has been enticing and behind all this whole thing, but he is about to be destroyed. The dwellers of the earth, they're going to be marvel that the beast has come forth. Why? Because he was and is not and now is to come. So he, the same way that Jesus is talked about as dying, died, and came back to life, right? There's this idea here that this counterfeit God, Satan, is trying to stand in for what Jesus has done, right? He is not, he's actually dead, and he's not going to come back, but they will marvel because in some way he's given a little bit of authority. He's given a little bit of authority. People marvel, the people of this world marvel at Satan, that he still is prowling around. All right, let's keep moving. This calls for a mind of wisdom. All right, so this threefold phrase, right? I'm going to say it's about being a counterfeit. This is another way that I think Satan entices many people. He says, look, I can give you everything that God can give you, that Jesus can give you. But there's just that one little word. He's not is, he's not, right? That one little word that throws us off. All right, let's keep moving. All right, this calls for a mind of wisdom. We're going to get it. We're going to make it. All right, we're going to make it. 8 o'clock, I'm cutting off. This calls for a mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. The woman, sorry. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom who have fallen, one is, and the other has yet to come. And when he does come, he must only remain for a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. All right? So who are the 7 horns? Kings, okay? What kings? What does this mean? So first of all, they're mountains on whom the woman is seated. On which. So why are they mountains? Okay, so a dispensationalist is going to say, all right, this has to be Rome, because it is the empire of the seven hills, right? The city of the seven hills, that's Rome. Well, it doesn't say hills, it says mountains, number one. All right, and number two, mountains here has not been interpreted at all to mean Rome or mean any type of empire like that at all. What are mountains in the book of Revelation and in the Bible? Not obstacles, but I like how you're thinking, Edie. In the Old Testament, mountains were kingdoms or kings, right? Okay, so let's look at some of that. Isaiah 2:2, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains. That is, it will be above all other nations, right? The nation of that sees God as Lord, that has the house of the Lord, Israel, will be above all the other nations and shall be lifted above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. Jeremiah 51:25, behold, I am against you, O destroying mountain, declares the Lord, which destroys the whole earth. I will stretch out my hand against you and roll you down from the crags and make you a burnt mountain. He is talking here in judgment of a kingdom, right? This is a kingdom that he's talking about in Jeremiah. Ezekiel 35:3, and say to it, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, Mount Seir, and I will stretch out my hand against you, and I'll make you a desolation and a waste. Now, one of the most clear ones here is Zechariah 4:7, who are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you shall become a plain, and he shall bring forward the top stone amid shouts of grace to it. This is talking specifically about a kingdom, a king, right, who is going to be overthrown. So mountains, a lot of times, talk about kings. And so then he goes on to talk about how these seven heads, right, or seven heads are seven mountains or seven kings. So he's just talking about kings here. Well, who are these kings? Are they some future king? Well, he does say that 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 has yet to come. And when that one comes, it's only going to be for a little while. All right, so we could say, well, maybe he is talking about Rome. All right, the city of 7 hills, 7 emperors. Okay, where do we start counting, though? Because guess what? Even in the time that we could try to think that John was alive, there were probably more like between 10 to 12 emperors. And so we can do a little finagling like a good dispensationalist would do, and say, all right, we don't count this one because he only reigned for a little bit, and we start with this one. We can be here all day trying to figure out who John's talking about. What is John talking about, though? Who are kings, and what is their ultimate fate, the kings? Okay, great. Are they empires? Seventh to come. Is it Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome, who he's talking about, right? 5 that were, 1 that is to come. Is that what he's talking about? Possible, I guess. But there are a few holes that we can poke here. The third, if we were to go back to Daniel, which I don't actually have all of Daniel 7 up here. All I have is the beast on whom this is talking about. But if we go back to Daniel chapter 7, it's not going to be on here. Who are the 3 empires that have been? Babylon's not included. Babylon's there. But Persia and the Medo-Persian Empire is not the 4th, but the 2nd that is mentioned there. Right? So there's a little bit of, we're still cherry picking. We're just saying, okay, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, let's just pick out some major world empires. Well, there were a lot more major world empires than that, and have been more than one major world empire since Rome that has been very anti-Christ, that we could easily say that's the seventh empire. So is it better to say that this is talking about something literal that's happening in the world, or is it better for us to stay in this spiritual realm, stay in this figurative realm, and say, okay, how would we interpret this? All right, what is he trying to say? What's the message he's trying to get across? 5 have fallen, 1 is. All right, the 6th one is. That is, what does 6 stand for? It's the number of man, right? It's the number of the beast. It's the number of man. 6. I mean, it makes sense that he would say that's who is. And there is one yet to come. So what is he saying? The end is near. I don't think there's any other message that we need to get from it. We don't need to figure out who these kings are. What he's saying is, it's coming soon. 7, what is 7? A number of completion, right? These world empires, we don't have to assign them. We don't have to assign numbers to direct, it doesn't have to have direct correlations, right? Because everything he's talking about is very figurative. But we're getting to the end. There's not much more before Jesus will come again. That's the idea, before the destruction of the beast. But then he says something interesting here. So the 7 heads, but what about this 8th one? Why does he say the 8th one here? As for the beast, that was and is not. It is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. What does that mean? All right, so we have 7, a number of completeness. Why does he go to an 8th one? Well, so some of us would say, okay, it's the empire, so there's actually an 8th empire after that, and that's the last empire of the whole world. No, the 8th is the beast. The Antichrist, Satan. Is this the future kingdom of Satan? No. What is very common in the Old Testament and in the Bible is to, we in English have exclamation points. In Greek, in Hebrew, there were no exclamation points. So how did they put an exclamation point on something? Well, look at Proverbs. I don't have these up here, but look at Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16. Look at Proverbs chapter 30, verse 15. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 2. Micah 5:5. In each of these places, he goes from a 6th to a 7th, or from a 7th to an 8th, to emphasize something. We saw this in Ecclesiastes. You remember me saying this in Ecclesiastes, this very thing. He's not just saying, a 7th one, but then he does it in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 with 2 and 3, if you remember. He talks about 1, and then he goes, but 2 is really good, but 3 is the best. It's this idea of, this is an exclamation point. The end is coming, and the end is going to mean destruction for the world system, right? That's all it is. It's not. We don't have to try to figure out some kind of convoluted thing. Try to figure out. It's just simply he's saying, look, the world systems, there are going to be many of them, but we're towards the end of that, and we are going to see it's going to be destroyed. All right. So then let's move on. The 10 horns. We got to keep moving. 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power. Okay, so we have 7 kings or kingdoms, and now 10 more kings? Where does all this come from? Well, it comes from Daniel, right? It's very clearly from Daniel. Daniel chapter 7 says this, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And he goes on to talk about then 7 heads at the end of the chapter. I didn't bring that in here. But Daniel chapter 7, very clearly, there's a link between the 10 horns and these 10 horns, which we know are kings, right? Just the kings of the earth. Well, who does it say? It says 10, these are 10 horns, 10 kings who have not received royal authority, but they are to receive royal authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. All right, so we've got 10 kings. What's the number 10 mean? Why 10? Exactly. So there's literally a similar idea to 7, a wholeness, a completeness, the complete, all of the world system. I mean, that's the idea here, right? It's all of the world systems are coming to an end. All of the world systems swear fealty to the beast and are going to give their loyalty to the beast. And these kings are, I believe, the same kings of the earth in verse 18 that they're going to have dominion. And they're also the same kings that come up to the Battle of Armageddon. Is this all literal? Probably not. It's probably not just some literal thing where there's going to be some great battle between all the kingdoms. Probably not. It's just us saying, it's simply John saying, look, all of the world system, all of the authority that you think the world system has, all that authority, first of all, has been given to it. And that authority, it's going to quickly give away, not to the right things, but to the wrong things. And they are of one mind, and they will make war on the Lamb. In the wilderness. This is not just on the Lamb, it's on the people of God. Why? Because they are the ones that are there with him. And those with him, verse 14, are called, chosen, and faithful. So there are people with him. So when the world system makes war on the Lamb, this is a war on us. But look at what they said. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those with him are called and chosen and faithful. God calls, God chooses, God makes faithful and gives faith, right? And so the idea here ultimately is we can overcome the Lamb, or the world systems, the beasts, the kingdoms of this world, if we stay true to the Lamb. That's the message of Revelation. That's been the message over and over again. We don't have to, this is not some future thing that we have to say, well, there's going to be some battle, so I got to just make sure I'm faithful. No, it's right now. Are we being faithful right now, or are we in bed with the world? The angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. Literally, the kingdoms of this world are going to destroy themselves. That's the idea. They are going to destroy themselves. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Why did the 10 horns and the beast hate the prostitute? Well, ultimately, it's because they're going to see that the thing that they thought was going to be so enticing has not enticed them at all. The kingdoms and kings, people of this world. And the beast is going to ultimately destroy. It's almost like a bait and switch. It's almost like hey, I'm going to be enticed by the world systems. The prostitute, that looks really good, but then what's the word? It's like the carrot and the stick, right? You have this carrot that's dangling out in front of you, and then if you get close enough, you get the stick. The beast. That's the idea. There's a destruction of this world system because it's a bait and switch. What's at the base of the world system? Satan, the beast. And he will destroy you, me, everything if we move into and try to be like the world. That's the idea, right? Ultimately, this woman, right, is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. This great city will ultimately be destroyed by itself, by Satan himself. It's crazy to think that it's really crazy to see how God is going to, this is a true statement. God ultimately allows the things, when we make our choices, when the world makes their choice, to just live in that choice. That's the idea that we're seeing here. People who choose to marry themselves to the beast, who choose to marry themselves to the world system, he's just going to say, all right, do it. But what I'm telling you is that at the end of the day, it's going to destroy you, because Satan doesn't care about you. All he cares about is power. All he cares about is trying to destroy me. And he's going to destroy anything he can on the way. And if he can keep you as a believer distracted enough by the world, then he's won. We're going to talk more about this as we get into this sermon series. But one of the things that I'm going to bring up quite a bit in this next sermon series is this idea that Satan, if he can't get us to do morally evil things, then he's going to distract us. He's going to keep us busy with inane, not great things. And so I really believe what John is saying here, yes, it's tricky, and we can try to equate it to some kind of, and again, I'm holding my interpretation very loosely handed. But ultimately, all of the systems of this world are going to be given over to themselves. Hell was not created as a place to punish sinners. Can I say this real quick? Hell and judgment and all these things is not a place. It is a place of God's judgment, but it is not a place that was created to punish sinners. It was a place where sinners can get what they always chose and what they always wanted. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, choosing the world systems means choosing what the end of that world system is. And that is destruction and judgment and ultimate unfulfillment. Hell is a shrine to the pride of man. That's what it is. I don't need you, God. I am going to choose my own way. Right? That's what hell is. And so we're going to see that more and more as we continue in the book of Revelation. We made it through Revelation 17, barely. We may want to touch up a few things next week, but we made it. So let's pray together, and we'll be dismissed. God, I thank you so much for your word. I thank you that we did make it through Revelation chapter 17. I pray that even in my babblings and my teachings, God, that you would have the glory, that you would teach us something, not that we would be confused or think, man, this has to be this or that or the other, God, but that ultimately we would be spurred on to good works, spurred on to loyalty to the Lamb, God. That we would choose the mark of the people of God, that we would choose to be faithful to the Lamb, that we would choose to dwell in the city of God and not to marry ourselves or prostitute ourselves out to the systems of this world. God, we thank you that you do love us, that you sent your Son, that you did choose us, that you did save us. And I pray that we would not marvel this week at the world, would not marvel at the prostitute who is this world system. God, that we would marvel only and worship only at the feet of the Lamb. God, have mercy. Lord, have mercy on us. We love you. We thank you for loving us. In Jesus' name, amen.